Okay, I think it's kind of starting. Maybe we are live already. Yeah, I think we are live. So hello, welcome everybody. This is the first meeting, no, the second meeting actually of February for the web server frameworks meeting. So yeah, first of all, anyone has any announcements to make? Okay, seems like no announcement for now. So I guess we can start with the official agenda. Sounds good for all of you? Okay, so the first issue is review and update documented HTTPS strategy, which is the 102.
Okay.
Also, feel free to add your names on
Can you share the screen on this, so probably we can comment it
Oh, yep.
live?
Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, yay. Okay. Share my screen number 1. Yep. I think you should see the issue, right?
Yep. So I mean, it's just about if we agree on this document or not. So I don't know if we want to do this asynchronously, or we can just like have a look now and see if there is anything that because I think there isn't anything controversial in it, and we can just like approve it.
From what I see, seems legit to me.
Yeah.
Like I think the key points are this list that API should be protocol independent. And I think we all agreed about this also in the previous meetings. Like good defaults, obviously.
Yeah.
Consistent alloys integration, requirements like piping.
Yep.
Maybe from what I see here, the only point that I think we are missing, there is no mention about having compatibility, interoperability, or being built on the established what WG API, like request and response and so forth. Because when we talk about API here, we are just talking about Node API. Since on the other side, instead, we have an intention to at least consider the other APIs eventually to build upon that, but that's another point. But we agreed on considering those API, maybe we need to add a point on that.
Yeah, I do agree on this. Like, I think we should make it clear that we want to be compliant with other runtimes. Because if we do it once, we want to do it like compliant. I don't think we want to do the same mistake. And there is also one thing that in the document it states that HTTP2 is in maintenance mode. Is it?
As far as I know, yes, nobody's really doing anything on that, rather than updating dependencies and such. Also, because it is my understanding that HTTP2 on the long run will be forgotten.
As it should.
In theory, so we want to maintain compatibility. Obviously, we want to support it, but we might not really want to innovate on that.
Okay, so this is something important because like it means that there is no just bug fix, nothing new on HTTP2. So yeah, I think
just to give you a little more context on HTTP2, I might be wrong, but in the last year and a half at least, for sure, I haven't seen anything meaningful for HTTP2. Just the update of the ng and HTTP2 library, which is the main dependency, and some minor PRs about enabling some missing options, but pretty much patch level in a way, not really important. So,
Okay, so I think we can comment under the issue and say that we think that we should include um, like standardization, and I think that the rest is good to go.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, I will write on the I will try to write down on the minutes.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
oh, thanks. I was going to ask where are the minutes.
Let me pass the link, I think, on the chat. Yeah. Yep, should be in the chat now.
Actually, Jean is not here, so I'm removing him.
Oh, maybe he's in the waiting room. Let me see. Participants. Oh, yeah. He's here, but yeah,
Oh, yeah,
I
okay.
didn't promote him. Yeah, because when I share, I just don't see the rest of the sub-screens of Zoom. So yeah, I promoted him. I will promote you again to co-host, John.
Jean, sorry to have removed you. I thought you were not here.
No worries. No, I'm late and still a bit sick, so no worries.
Okay, I can see the list of
Like
participants.
I was listening to you like discussing about HTTP2 being in maintenance mode. Does that also mean, and also like in the long term, HTTP3 is, I would say better, even if it's not the best word here, but does that mean that we want to only have something that work with HTTP3 and 1 and we skip completely HTTP2?
Well, it depends which. I mean, if you think about what we were discussing in the previous meetings, if we agree that we want to organize the new HTTP stack like the RFC, so we have the semantics and then we have low level and so forth, right? It means that in a way we can keep supporting it because it's not a completely different implementation on, for instance, on the low level. Because what is very messing up nowadays is that they don't share the three different versions of the protocol. They don't share anything in Node core except for the use of Node.net and sorry, the net module obviously and the streams, but they don't share anything. So that's why it's very hard to maintain a single version of the protocol because you have to maintain everything from net to, I mean, from level 1 to level 7 of the stack.
As an example of this, I recently I added a new API on a HTTP 1, like set headers in the past, and then I had to to do the same change on HTTP 2, and then there was a bug, and I had to fix it on HTTP 1 and port the bug fix on HTTP 2. It's a nightmare. This is not sustainable.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was mentioning. Basically, that's exactly the point. We are, for instance, we're also using different parsers. We have external libraries like NGHTTP2 on one side, LLHTTP on HTTP1. HTTP3 is a UDP based, is binary based, so it's going to be different as well, a third parser. And technically, we have a fourth parser, which is LLHTTP inside 11 with the WebAssembly version. So, I guess you can see the fragmentation is insane. I mean, for anybody watching, for the record, this is the result of 10 years of development. It's not that we are crazy people. It's just that adding pieces to pieces in 10 years leads to things like that sometimes.
Yeah, I think something that's been discussed heavily before is with Undici having its own WebAssembly LLHTTP. There's been discussions of trying to minimize that, trying to make it shared, or trying to bring Undici in its entirety into Node.js. I think that's a whole separate conversation. With the other ones, I think that's like a part of like the nature of the beast, right? Like there isn't just one parser library that can handle all three HTTP protocols. So you really do need all three. I think the one that you built, Paulo, like is there a path to us adopting that soon? Is that parser could that parser project have an HTTP2 and HTTP3 versions of itself all included?
To be honest, I haven't checked the specs. So I have to check how the parsing is done on HTTP2. I mean, how the data flows, because I remember there was some binary protocol, there was some headers compression, but I'm just talking out of memory because I never look into the protocol. So it might be that I can adapt Milo to work on HTTP2 and same for 3. To be honest, I don't have an answer right now because I never saw the spec. But if possible, I would love to extend to all the 3 protocols, because the thing is that the 3 specs share the semantics. That's for granted. Which means that we have the same headers in all the different protocols, maybe without different meanings, but we don't care because we don't analyze the meaning. We don't just analyze, I have this header, done. If I can, of course, have a single parser for all the 3, that would be great. Otherwise, in that case, this is one of the aspects that when we want the 3 implementation to diverge, because they have to process the data in a different way. But for instance, what Marco was saying is that we don't need the 3 different versions to implement 3 times at the same method, which is setting an header, which the header is basically only buffered locally and then eventually processed by the socket. That part, of course, should be common. When it comes to be flushed to the top, to the socket, of course, then yes, we need different implementation. But when we can unify the API and the implementation, we should. Then we might, of course, need to.
And also, like, this is what I was thinking, is that once we write the new like right now the socket API is only for outbound connections. Like, it's basically a client. So if the spec is like goes through the last stage and gets implemented, we might think to extend the spec to basically allow the socket API to be used also as a server.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, if the socket API is the new standard, then I think we should follow the new standard and not create another socket API for inbound connections. So this is something that we should talk with James and.
Are you talking about the Winter CG socket?
Yes.
Yeah, I wrote that in collaboration with them. It's a pretty cool API, but it's definitely tailored more towards your like worker D serverless functions kind of world than it is your like long running node like application. I maintain the Node.js implementation of that spec. I also like I said before, like wrote a decent part of that spec. I don't know how much development it has gotten since that work a few months ago, but I think that's also a good separate subject to talk about. Maybe create its own issue.
Actually, may I bring us slightly a separate point here, because I just realized that in this meeting and in all the previous meeting, I'm just saying in general, we always been talking about aligning with other specs, participating with initiatives like what WG or Winter CG and so forth, right? But I just realized that when we talk about participating in these groups, we talk like aligning to their specs, I mean, participating like just in adopting what they already agreed on, while instead we should also say, okay, if the socket API has been designed to be, for instance, client only, and we need some server semantics, we should participate as active participants, say, okay, we need this expansion to the API, to the spec. Can we extend the spec? Can we propose an amendment to the spec and so forth? So there's something we kind of never say explicitly, so I would like to make this explicit. We need to be active participant to these kind of groups.
Which groups in particular are you talking about?
WinterCG probably.
Extensively
Okay.
WinterCG, for instance.
So this is something that has come up, I think, and it's also only going to be settled by the Node TSC. There is, I don't think that this working group is going to like make that call, but what we can do is we can provide like a great kind of like, hey, Node TSC, we would, as a working group, it would be to our benefit if Node participated more in the winter CG discussions, or like participated properly or implemented common API for X, Y, and Z reason. If we as a working group can present that reasoning to the TSC, there's a better chance of the TSC kind of approving it, and us working in making that change.
I mean, for the record, probably you have missed that, but in a couple of weeks, I'm gonna be the new member of the TSC, so I can definitely bring this to the TSC and advocate for this thing if we want to do that. I think we should.
Perfect.
So I can definitely bring into the next meeting and say, okay, do we want to take an official position on how we want to participate in this kind of groups? Sorry for the word mess up, but
Yeah, and I think that's perfect. I also want to try to keep us somewhat on agenda. Are we talking about, have we moved on from the from what's on the screen right now, the maintaining HTTP?
Yeah, I think we went a bit off topic on this one. I think like what the point that it could be added is that we want to be spec compliant, so we want to be participating with WinterCG and with other runtimes to to make whatever new API and to give direction to this working group that we claim to be spec compliant.
Just to circle back a bit, just on HTTP2, HTTP3, I just added 2 links from the W3C, and seems like usage of HTTP2 is declining almost as fast as HTTP3 is growing. So we lost something around 5%, or at least we moved from, what's the true value, 40% to 35% for HTTP2. So I guess it will become minority this year. HTTP3 will be mostly there will be more usage on HTTP3 than HTTP2.
I think I mentioned that earlier out of my heart, let's say without any data, but you're confirming that. My impression was that on the long term, on the very long term, let's say a couple of years from now, we're gonna only maintain. We're gonna have only people mostly using 3 or 1, not 2, because 2 was like a not really loved protocol, probably.
Not sure if it was covered yet, but do we have any sense of these for Node specifically? Because I think these numbers are more broad industry, and my general understanding here is that nearly zero major websites, companies, web apps, products use HTTP 2 or 3 directly from Node. So while those stats look very interesting, and I'm not saying that should be discounted, I also think we should be pretty conscientious of Node's role in that and what it means for us, like from a workload perspective, because nobody's actually Node. Then what are we talking about, right?
Yeah, as a maintainer on the HTTP one, I receive pings every time there is a new issue on that, and HTTP 2 is I don't see many issues. This is my experience, so it's not statistics in any way, but I don't see many issues or many complaints on HTTP 2 because I think it's not very used, honestly. So yeah.
And for the record, Wesley, there is no use of HTTP 3 in Node because there is no HTTP Node
implementation.
We just don't have it. So there's
yeah, obviously. Sorry, I meant that more in a theoretical sense than even necessarily stats. I meant more like we need to be conscientious of and probably almost the entirety of the HTTP2 usage would be through gRPC, right? Not HTTP2 directly from Node servers. So like we should just, if we're gonna like really drill into this and pick priorities and stuff, we probably need to go a little bit deeper than just like, you know, the broad public internet specs. We probably need to do some deep dives with some of our perspective, like either library maintainers who want to better leverage Node core APIs around it. So that might be like the gRPC folks. We just should be pretty clear because it's a fairly large amount of work involved, and we want to make sure it you know, it's not going to go the way of HTTP2 has so far and be really, you know, underutilized.
Well, actually, you know what? The problem is that there is a subtle problem here on understanding how if people use HTTP 1 versus 2. And that's that usually, and there's also something that for security purpose, I said in one of my talks, for instance, and Marco knows and talking about, is that usually people don't directly put Node in front of the clients when acting as a server. Usually there is a HTTP proxy, there is Nginx, there is a load balancer, there is a lot of stuff. So it might be possibly believed that the the company is using HTTP2, but since Node is an application server in the intranet, basically or in the cloud or whatever, in that case, usually they open HTTP 1 for internal communication and not even using HTTPS, which is also another whatever. So it's very hard to predict whether people want HTTP 1 or 2 because of ours might only use the HTTP 1 server, not even HTTPS. On the client side, it's a completely different story because it depends what they are connecting to, but that's something we cannot really measure probably.
Yeah, and to add on to that, in most of these scenarios, you need, in order to leverage HTTP 2 or 3 in the application layer and all of the features that we'd have to be supporting here, you need really great support for all of those proxy layers, and almost none of them have it today. So it's a pretty big gap. So even if you wanted to use, you know, HTTP 3, if you had support and you had, you know, all this stuff laid out and you wanted to do, you know, the bidirectional sockets or whatever, like any of these things that is really nice about HTTP 3, you need to make sure your entire company's infrastructure is ready to be able to pass that through correctly in order to use it at the application layer. And that, even if we land this, I think that is probably also many years out for most companies. I know for Netflix, for sure, we've even had a lot of work and questions around the value, but I mean, we've done it for even some really old, long existing things like WebSockets. Making those pass nicely through all of the infrastructure layers is actually rather difficult, you know, and you have to be really sure that it's going to be worth it, right? And so like, I really think the use cases here for Node specifically are probably not your production servers. Frankly, I think they're probably your Webpack dev server, your NPM CLI, your, you know, like these sort of more niche use cases, because those could benefit and you'd write them in Node, you know, ideally. And that to me is where like probably we should be doing some investigation with the folks who run those and say, hey, are you interested in using a Node, you know, core HTTP 3 implementation to improve the NPM registry or whatever, right? Like, because if we could land those things, then that would be meaningful usage. Whereas production application developers in the standard like web APIs, it's just not going to be there for years and years and years.
I totally agree because, for instance, I mean, just to give you also another idea, if we build on top of the request and response from the WG, right? We could completely remove that layer in theory. We could also work with proxy makers to create a new innovation for delivering HTTP inside an infrastructure rather than outside where the specs matter in theory, right? there are rooms for, I mean, the scenario since our HTTP implementation were created has changed drastically. Think about 2013 and think about now, what was back there and what is now. I totally agree that we should not aim for the standalone node application running somewhere. I mean, if you just think about HTTP 3, right, is UDP, which means that the data can come from different paths. You have to rebuild the sequence is a mess. You know that I get your point. We should talk with other people involved in the other stakeholders from other point of view. I completely agree on that.
And I should be clear, I'm not saying like we shouldn't do it or anything. I think these are, things that we do kind of have to do. I just want to make sure we don't, do them because we think it's the right technical choice without actually having some backing, because it's going to be a lot of work, right? Like building and maintaining these APIs, they're quite different from HTTP 1. They're, we talked back in the early days with this group about, when James was adding HTTP 3 in the PR, how difficult it was to figure out how to reconcile the existing 2 HTTP stacks, and then adding the third one on top of it was now we have 3. And James is like, I don't think that is going to be sustainable for folks long term. We should be conscientious of it. So like, just because people ask for it doesn't necessarily mean they really want it for real. They just are like, in theory, saying, oh, that's the cool new thing. And so like, unless we get a company to sponsor the work and maybe, some really big investment from somebody who's going to use it in production, I think we just need to be really careful about people spending tons of time adding that to core today. Like maybe James can talk to folks at Cloudflare. Maybe they have a use case or something. I just know that Netflix has experimented with these things a bunch and never found anything that we actually wanted to ship. So ship internally, rather. Sorry, to be clear. Obviously, the external stuff, the CDN stuff, that is, leveraging it. It's just the node layer that doesn't typically need it. Sorry, go ahead, John.
That would be really interesting to know, like for every big cloud provider and people like doing at scale, like computing at scale, if they have a value like a percentage of how many, for example, API are HTTP 1, 2, and 3. Because like if you take Lambda from AWS, at best, the link from your customer to your API gateway can be HTTP 2, but the internal part will be HTTP 1 as this is just an event. No, it's not. Yeah, it's just an event. And I don't even know if you can deploy HTTP 3 compliant compute stuff on AWS, other than your own server, basically.
I mean, I guess you can if you have EC2, right? So you will control, basically it's just a virtual machine, but for managed services, probably you can't.
Yeah, yes.
That's challenging. That's challenging. I mean, think about this. How much time it took James to have a working quick implementation? Years. I mean, that's for instance, that's just and this is just the starting piece for HTTP 3. HTTP 3 is going to be a very challenging and demanding project that will take a lot of time to
But like, consider that since HTTP 3 is not in production, like we don't need technically to support it immediately. Like it's there, it's in the core, but it's not exposed to the user base. So if it doesn't work, like it doesn't matter. Like there is not an obligation of making it work right now. And so we could also start from HTTP 1 and build our way up. And if someone wants to do HTTP 3, good. If nobody wants, then it's gonna stay as it is.
You know why we might need that let me I mean, I really convoluted talk here, but my my fear is that if we start redeveloping a new version of HTTP 1, right, saying I support the socket, I support request response, whatever, right, and we don't have, while we are doing that, a concurrent implementation of a new protocol like HTTP or 3, we might end up separating concerns in the wrong way because we don't have any competing API, and we might end up doing the same mistakes we did with the current implementation. So I would love to have two concurrent implementations, like 1 and 3, 1 and 2, I don't care, just to make sure that if we see that we are running the same method twice, it means that it should be put somewhere in common. And this way we don't make any mistake on separating the different layers. That's my only fear.
I think I just barely beat you, Ethan. So I think that's a super valid concern. Really, I think why we had talked earlier about trying to combine the three. That was the older plan. I will say, though, I think it is probably satisfactory to do the exercise without actually doing the work, right? So that would be making the API that we think would work with HTTP 3 and then leaving it as a stub, right? Like we say, we didn't actually go and implement it, but we think theoretically this should work. And I say that because I think that until we get real application developers using it, we're not going to find the real world impact of making that mistake, right? And so like until we can get somebody who's going to say like, yeah, I'm going to use it, let's build it out, we're going to have those mistakes no matter what, right? Like even if we try our hardest to not, I mean, this is just the nature of the problems. So I think like we could probably do a little bit of a shortcut there by just like making sure we say we intend to do this someday, but we are explicitly stubbing those APIs out now and not building the implementation until somebody's ready to volunteer to do that work. I think that would be a good happy medium to save us from the massive lift.
I was gonna I think the other thing with all of this is let's remember that like we can just have like we have the next HTTP repo in the node.org already. All of our work should just be done there. Like we can because before we even publish anything, we can go crazy with experiments and make it a mono repo and have split up as many packages as you want, or we could even just we can go even more meta and just if people have sort of like different opinions on implementations, we just build them on our own, and then we can convene and see what the merge path there might be to what this kind of like new API could look like. And we just like Undici has done, to spend a couple years building independently from Node Core, and if we make something great and magical, we document, we advertise, and we maybe even vendor it in if there's a reason to into Core. So I think that's probably our best bet rather than trying to like, have that debate now of like, oh, is what we're building better than the existing? Like, well, it doesn't matter. Let's just build it. Let's just, experiment and find out, and then go from there.
Yeah, I think we should jump to the next topic in the agenda, I think. Yeah, yes. Okay. So next topic in the agenda is the issue 71, which is URLs on oncoming request. Let me see. I think this issue was originally made by Wes, but
yeah, this one's pretty old, isn't it?
Yep.
Where did we land? Somebody already did. What is this? A PR for? Oh, that's in Watson.
Yeah, looks like. Let me set the link to the PR in the chat.
So it looks like Matteo chimed in a bit fairly recently saying URL from rec would be a good API. I think that's seems pretty good.
So I probably have a bit more context on this one because there was recently an issue on Node. So there was someone complaining that the URL that we parse is not compliant with WG compliant. If I find the issue, I will link it. So I think it might make sense to like to have a compliant URL. I will just link it so we can like you can read it asynchronously and discuss it probably in the next meeting.
Okay, yeah, I think it's a good idea. So agree to keep this topic in the agenda to have some offline discussion for now.
I can provide a little extra context. There is like direct ecosystem need for essentially like a URL.parse. And I think like Stifle in here as a teammate of mine. We use this in the Vercel CLI and throughout the Vercel stack. And we have either made the decision to continue using the deprecated API, well aware of the issues, or we've like re-implemented it ourselves in different ways. So I think I'm seeing like the recommendation is maybe we like vendor original URL, but that still uses the unsafe URL.parse. So then it looks like the references deprecate it and or stop using that and use something else. But that PR doesn't seem to be making any progress, right? Or there's not even a PR, is it? Yeah, it is a PR. So is there another path forward here than using this, than like using this external module, or like trying to or should we just make the focus like getting this to ship?
So there is a draft PR, the one I pasted in the chat. It's from like last comment is from 2 weeks ago. So I think there is work being done on it.
Oh, I just see this now. Okay, so what is this? Parse the incoming HTTP message URL with the WhatWig URL class. And this is full URL. Interesting. Okay, cool. And this is for 51311. No, but they're doing this to solve what seems like another problem.
Yeah, that request URL is not spec compliant. It's not like it's not a URL object. It's a string, but it's not parsed correctly using the correct like the spec compliant URL parsing.
I see. So the issue is separate. So I think what URLs on incoming requests is this old one from Wes. And this is basically like it's all full circle, where basically our existing request module doesn't use WhatWig URL. And that is confusing and breaks a lot of people's code because everyone seems to have adopted WhatWig URL, regardless if you're on Node or not. That seems to be the API of choice for URLs. Cool. This is definitely a great issue.
I will say I am fairly confident that we can't trust the host header. So this PR is somebody's got to probably approach that, right? You can't just blindly trust that and then use that. So the way people use URLs in their web APIs, right, is by like regurgitating it back, right? So like I've got a resource A that has a relationship to resource B, and I want to provide a link in my JSON API over to resource B. So I use the incoming URL relatively, right? And so if we regurgitate the host header, like there's probably a bunch of weird ways security-wise where that could be an attack. So like there's probably some research to do here. I'm very cautious of just regurgitating the host header back out Like, I think we probably need a security pass at that. I don't know if people disagree, but that seems suspicious to me. But other than that, this seems like a good way to go about adding. I mean, maybe we call it something other than full URL, but that's like just a bike shed, right?
Yeah, it's a bike shed. Cool. Well, I like keeping this on our agenda and making this as a part of one of the things we work on. I think that's a great change for Node in general, is figuring out how to make our HTTP APIs migrate to what we URL.
Actually, do we understand people's use case for the host in the URL? Are people, I guess people probably are using the host header in their real apps for this. I'm pretty sure that's a security vulnerability if you use it in the wrong way, right? Because it can be spoofed. And you can then trick your API into making requests to an external host.
Yeah, but
Like,
I don't think that application blindly trusts an header and like it sounds too, you know, like blindly trust an header with a URL and execute stuff with it. Obviously, it's a security concern, so I don't think people use it in such a like dangerous way. I think there are some other things related.
Well, I hope that when you rely on the host header, you configure your application proxy or the firewall to filter the hosts that you actually accept. I hope. And when I say I hope, I'm pretty sure that it doesn't happen, even if it should, but whatever. To address your question, Wes, I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is a multi-tenant application, for instance, where you can use the host header to identify your client.
yeah, I believe there's an express. Sorry, I was trying to type and find it. I believe there's an express module for this vhost or something like that. I'm just trying to find it. I don't use it. I just want to see what it's doing.
Well, in my nightmare PHP days, the virtual host in Nginx or Apache was basically based on the host.
Yeah.
Even though it was done at the Apache level, not at the you see the host, right? It was done at the in that case at the Apache level, not at the PHP layer. You know, this is slightly different because if maybe the proxy might be just a dumb proxy that forwards and back and forth the data without even analyzing it, which might be a thing, I don't know. But other than that, I mean, in my experience, I never used the host header when I was just dealing with an application, so that's my only idea.
Okay, I'm gonna guess now that I'm looking at the vhost package that if we had a legitimate security concern about folks about exposing it via this way in a library or in Node Core, that it would have been raised as a CVE against vhosts because it is doing that. So maybe that's safe.
What I actually don't understand is we are not. I mean, that entire PR, I never understood why there was so much concern for security, because at the end of the day, the user might directly do that on the application. It's just basically syntactic sugar as a shortcut. We are not exposing anything which is not already available to the user. It's just that we are gluing together as a convenience method. So I actually don't understand why.
My understanding when folks have filed these kind of things before is that we have tried Express here. I'm speaking for Express, not Node, has tried to make that argument like, hey, look, this is not, you still have to do the thing right. Their argument was that it made it abstracted away from the end user or easier for them to make the mistake. And I believe it was actually rather difficult to fend off some of those CVEs in the past. So the idea there is not necessarily even strictly security. It's more about making sure that we don't have to constantly fight against it. Now, I have learned recently that Node is its own CNA. So maybe that's not
Yes.
as big an issue for Node, and maybe we just want to say in a footnote in the docs, just remember you can't trust the host in this URL. It is spoofable or something. That might be
Yeah, and
good.
one other issue is that it can lead to crashes. Like if someone finds a URL, like it happened recently, like someone created a URL that Ada was not parsing correctly and made it crash. So it's something dangerous. Parsing stuff that comes from the outside, especially URLs, it's very hard, and it can lead to a lot of security vulnerabilities and issues. So I guess the concern is right, but like I don't know how much like if it's not worth implementing it.
Okay, just a small interruption from my side. Last 8 minutes, should we change topic? There is anything urgent that we want to discuss on this, or should we keep on this? I'm happy if we want to keep on this track. So
I think we don't have enough time to discuss anything in the next steps. There are definitely too big, probably. So my call is to continue on this one. That's my.
Can I just take 5 seconds and then you can continue? Just as a quick reminder, there will be an event in London in April, 4 and 5. First week of April, a collaborator summit. So for one point, I think we can suggest to have a session for us to discuss and to meet, and at least for the people that will be able to join. There could be great. And also it was just a global reminder of the collaborator summit in April in London, basically. Sorry for the complete change subject.
I should be there, just for the record.
Cool, I will be there too, yeah.
Yes, Wes, definitely. Just before we run out of time very quickly, I agree on Wes' point to just outlining the documentation. To be honest, it's something we already do for HTTP when we enable the insecure HTTP parsing. We let the user do that, telling them is your responsibility now if you choose to do that. So we can, is that definitely an option for us?
There's a couple of spots where we actually will return, client errors. I'm wondering if that would also be another case if somebody accesses the URL, the real URL or whatever that one, what did they call it? Full URL, and it throws. I wonder if there's some case also for Node returning that as a 400 error for the client.
Yeah,
right?
It might be possible. I don't see why not.
Excuse me.
Like we already have socket errors and stuff that bubble up that the users have to listen for. I think we made sure that it bubbled up in the same way so that they could intercept it if they wanted to, but a invalid URL.
The problem is that you cannot restore them. That's the problem. I mean, once you raise once you raise a client error, the API demands that you dump the rest of the socket. For instance, if there is a request that fails, there is a keep alive enabled. After the client error, you are responsible for terminating the socket because the node will consider a socket to be invalid from that point. So there is no mechanism for us to say, oh, everything sounds fine except the URL is correct. Do you want to keep it or not? And after that, you can eventually keep the socket. So
you can also create the API with a validation callback.
That's another thing. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm just saying if we talk about the raw Node API and we demand the parsing and so forth, once we raise a client error, the socket is garbage. You cannot use the socket. You can only use the socket to reply to the client, you're done, and then you have to close it. So unless we change the API and we introduce a mechanism to resume on client error, which is perfectly doable. That's another topic. But as of now, we also have some issue in the past for this, and I'm also talking about Express because it was crashing Node. You have to treat the socket as garbage of an error. So once again, we can fix it if wanted, but for now we can't. I mean, not can we don't have a way to, but we can change it.
This would be the kind of thing that would be really nice to have in a higher level HTTP API wrapper.
Yes.
Because this would be things that the frameworks just would have to pave over for end user experience no matter what. So yeah, I like if we landed this as is, right here in this PR that's a draft, like Express would almost certainly just have to wrap that in a try catch and then bubble up the errors on its own in the middleware stack. Like, I don't think we would leave that to clients and tell them you have to wrap every single access of full URL in a try catch. Like that's not, a ergonomic.
No, but especially is a mixture because now the HTTP is managing the socket, is closing, I mean, there are too many interconnection between modules that is very hard to tackle. With a new clean implementation, yes, we would be easy to do that. We have a client error. If you catch it and you say something like, pardon me for the example, if you use the equivalent of prevent default in the browser, then we won't close the socket. Anyway, I think we run out of time.
Do we want to just go and jump into this thread and say, hey, who opened it? It's pretty recent. So I'm just wondering, should we try to
Yeah, we can keep the conversation open.
Yep.
Like the author of the pull request is it's working on it. I've seen many changes, and so I think it's good to like have a conversation there.
Well, anyway, folks, I also have to leave. Thank you for a wonderful meeting.
Yep.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you.
Have a good day.
Bye bye.
everyone?